Thank you, Mr. President. On December 14th of last year, the world watched in horror as we received news that in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, 26 and 7-year-olds were killed at the hands of a gunman wielding a semi-automatic rifle armed with multiple 30-round clips, as well as 6 of their teachers and professionals who were charged with caring for them. 26 people died in that school that day, and the world has not been the same since. The state of Connecticut, as well as other states like New York and Colorado and many others, passed some of the strongest laws trying to bring some common sense to our gun laws in a generation. This body, though, has, in the days since Sandy Hook, done nothing. We debated a bill supported by 90% of Americans that would extend background checks to most all gun sales in this country, just to make sure that criminals and people with serious mental illness didn't have their hands on guns. And even though it got 55 votes here, it didn't become a law because of a strange rule that we have here requiring 60 votes for most everything that comes through this place. And while everything that we've done here has been driven by that memory of what happened in our state, what happened to those 20 beautiful little first graders. The fact is that 28 people died that day, including the gunman and his mother, and that is less than die every day in this country at the hands of gun violence. The everyday deaths that occur in our cities and suburbs throughout our country, has kind of become raindrops in this nation. We've become callously used to the fact that people die all the time at a greater rate than almost anywhere else in the world due to guns. And so, Mr. President, what I'm intending to do is just come down to this floor week after week after week until we get our act together and do what the American public wants us to do, which is to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and try to get the most dangerous weapons back into the hands of law enforcement and the military. I'm just going to come down here week after week and tell the simple stories of the dozens of people every day who lose their lives due to gun violence. Here's the number. Since December 14th, that awful, terrible day, 3,966 people have died at the hands of a gun. By the end of today, depending on how tonight goes across this country, that number could be 4,000, because we're averaging about 30 a day all across this country. And well, people have gotten to know the victims in Sandy Hook due to some amazing reporting that's taken place. People don't know the stories of the people who die every day. And so I'm going to come down here every week and try to tell the stories of those people, to give voice to these victims. So let me talk about a few more this afternoon, Mr. President. Let me focus on my state to start. Let me focus on Hartford, Connecticut, where just a few days ago on May 8th, Felix de Jesus III was killed when he was simply going to sell a electric tablet, a Samsung electric tablet, with someone that had agreed to buy it over Craigslist. His father said this guy kept on calling and calling, so the guy arranged to see me, and the father said of his son, he's told me, "I'll just be right back, Dad." At around 8 p.m., on May 8th, police received a 911 call, and they found him dead in his car, suffering from a single gunshot wound. His father said, "They took my son, my only son. Now his kids are left alone with nobody except for us, and that's just not right." He had a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old son. He was just going to sell a tablet computer, and he was shot in the head and died, leaving a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old behind. He was doing everything that he was supposed to do. He was graduate of high school. He was working at a local hotel. He was engaged to be married, left behind 2 children. Out in Northern California, the day before, on May 7th, a 45-year-old man fatally shot his wife and their 2 young daughters in their home, and he got away. His wife, Sandy, and their 2 daughters, Shelby, 8, and Shasta, 4, all had been shot multiple times. There had been calls out to the home for domestic disturbances in the recent weeks. The kids were pulled out of school. Something clearly was going on in that house. And this guy was a dangerous guy. In 2002, he had been charged with distribution of drugs, felony possession of a firearm, possessing a machine gun. He pleaded guilty, and he'd been in prison for 10 months. We're still trying to figure out, only about a week later, if this guy was supposed to have weapons in the first place. But we know that even if he was banned from buying weapons, it wouldn't have been that hard for him to get them. We can't say for certain how he came across the weapons that killed his wife and 2 kids. But if he was a criminal that was on one of these lists, it wouldn't have been that hard for him simply to go on the internet and buy a weapon, or go to a local gun show and buy a weapon. Because if he went either of those routes, according to current law, he would have never been checked, likely, if he was a criminal. Sandy, 34, Shelby, 8, and Shasta, 4, killed on May 7th. Stephen Jones was killed that same day, a lifelong resident of Charleston, Massachusetts. He was 21 years old. His friends said everybody loved him. You would never expect something like this to happen to him. He wasn't in the streets. He was just into sports and partying. This is a shock. Stephen Jones was breaking up a fight when a gun went off and he was killed. His uncle said he was the definition of a good kid. He was just there trying to break up a fight, and he ended up getting shot. 21 years old. And by now, everybody knows what happened this weekend in New Orleans. Gunmen opened fire on people marching in a neighborhood Mother's Day parade. The FBI described it as just a flare-up of street violence, and 19 people were wounded. 10 men, 7 women, a boy, and a girl. The children were both 10 years old, and luckily, they were just grazed by the bullets, and they are reported today to be in good condition. There are so many weapons on our streets today, most of them there illegally, that these things happen day in and day out. Mostly it's not what happened in New Orleans. Mostly it's not 19 people being shot at a parade. Mostly it's just one-on-one gun violence. But we refuse to do anything about it. 3,966 people just since Newtown have died from guns. And our response is nothing. It was awful enough to read about the violence at that Mother's Day parade. But I want everybody to think about what kind of Mother's Day Nicole Hockley, the mother of Dylan, had on Sunday. What kind of Mother's Day it was for Nelba Marquez Green, the mother of Anna. What kind of Mother's Day Francine Wheeler got to have without her son Ben, or Jackie Barden without her son Daniel. As awful as it was to think of 19 people being shot in New Orleans at a Mother's Day parade, it was just as horrifying to read an op-ed that these 3 mothers submitted yesterday on Mother's Day. They wrote, "The gravity of the moment that comes with holding your child for the first time, looking into their eyes, rocking them to sleep, allowing their breath to fill your heart, marveling at how nature has taken a part of you and a part of your husband to create something uniquely beautiful. The seriousness of that moment is only eclipsed by the moment you discover that your little boy or little girl is forever gone, just a few hours after watching them wave at you from the back of a school bus. We are constantly asked, these mothers wrote, how do you go on? The answer, they wrote, lies in the promise we made to our children when they were born. And perhaps more important, the promise we made when they were so senselessly taken from us. That promise for those four mothers is to do something, to try to make sure that that never, ever happens again. The promise that they made was bigger than that, to try to do something for the 4,000 families that have lost sons and daughters and mothers and fathers and husbands and wives since Sandy Hook happened. Nicole and Nelba and Francine and Jackie came down to Washington, D.C., day after day, week after week, and pleaded with this place to do something. And they were joined over that period of time by hundreds of other family members representing the 3,966 families who have been grieving since then. Mr. President, there has been some level of optimism that we have the capacity here to revisit this legislation, that sometime later this year we can take another shot at trying to make sure that another Sandy Hook doesn't happen. We can take another moment to reflect on whether or not it's okay that thousands of criminals can go onto the internet or walk into a gun show and get a gun without ever having to show that they have the legal capacity to do that. I hope that's the case. And as a means to getting people to that moment where we can try to have some coming together on behalf of all these families, I'd encourage everybody to read this op-ed written by Nicole and Nelba and Francine and Jackie. It's called Keeping a Mother's Promise. Because if after reading this, people in this chamber can look these mothers in the eye and say that in the wake of Sandy Hook and in the wake of 4,000 other deaths since then, our answer in the United States Senate is to do nothing, then what on earth are you here for? I yield the floor.